My name is Oksana Mamchenkova, and I am a project coordinator for the Europe-Ukraine desk, which is a project of n-ost. And we are in this project working to bridge perspectives and to connect journalists from Ukraine and from, as for now, 6 Western European countries. And these countries are Bulgaria, Hungary, Italy, Spain, Germany, and France. And today we have our 6th Media Hub event, which is a series of conversations about journalism, about coverage of Russia's war against Ukraine. And today's Media Hub is in a way special because we have here a big group of journalists from these 6 countries. So together with the group during this week, we had a big and interesting journey. My aim was to give our guests a better understanding of context, what is going on here, and how Ukrainian journalists, representatives of NGOs, and other people perceive war. How do they go through this war, and yeah, what's going on here. I will just make a short intro and then give a stage to our speakers and moderator. And I would just like to say one important thing for me is that today would be the 7th birthday of one very important Ukrainian figure. His name is Igor Kozlovsky. He was a Ukrainian scholar, scientist, and he died last year, and he was originally from Donetsk. He was in captivity over 700 days. Then he returned from captivity. He lived in Kyiv, and we unfortunately lost him in September last year. And today he would turn 70. And yeah, as I'm getting a bit emotional on this point, I will give a stage to our speakers. Our moderator is Angelina Kariakina, who is journalist, editor, and also co-founder of Public Interest Journalism Lab. We have our speakers. It is Anton Skyba. It is a journalist, photojournalist, Kateryna Zarembo, who is also a scientist and researcher and author of a book about Ukrainian East. And we have Alim Aliev, who is from Crimea and who is deputy deputy of head of Ukrainian Institute, right? Yes. So I give voice to speakers, and we have around 1 hour and a half. We'll have moderated part, and then you will have time for your questions. So also be prepared for that.
Thank you so much, Oksana. Good evening, everyone. Hello. We will be talking about access. We will be talking about editorial guidelines and other things. But let me start with a question about the place of the occupied territories on our mental map, so to say. Today, our thoughts are, and many of you and us and ours are with Avdiivka, and I wonder how many of us have been to Avdiivka even once, even though there was some time we could go there and see not only the approaching front lines, but also very nice urban cultural festivals, very nice people, and actually a nice and really, really cute city. So talking about that and knowing that we had really limited access, we had so many, we were struggling as journalists to get to the occupied territories, and there were other reasons why I believe the coverage has been since 2014 quite poor. If you agree with this statement, where would you say it left the occupied territories on our mental map as a society, as a country? I mean, is it somewhere behind? Is it already something that we, frankly speaking, said goodbye to in the coverage of central media, in our daily life, in the thoughts of people? I would probably start with Alim.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alim, and I'm a former journalist. And after the temporary occupation of Crimea in February 2014, me and two of my friends, we founded organization that named Crimea SOS. And it was a part of my human rights activism. And now I'm working in cultural diplomacy sphere. But during my 35 years, I'm 35 years old, Crimea in my blood, yeah? And in any situation, in any complicated conversation about Crimea, about Ukraine at whole, I bring the topic of Crimea to the agenda. Because it's very simple. This war started from Crimea. And this war will end in Crimea. Because Crimea, it's not only the issue for Ukraine, it's about our global issue. Yeah, because after the temporary occupation of Crimea, we have Russia destroys the international law. When we talk about how Crimea and other occupied territories present in Ukraine agenda, to be honest, before the full-scale invasion, we tried every time to tell about Crimea, about ordinary life of people in Crimea, tell them about the situation with human rights violations, etc., 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 to Ukrainians. And after full-scale invasion, Crimea brings itself to the Ukraine agenda at whole. And now, as I guess, for Ukrainians, for Ukrainian society, it's a core issue to deoccupy the peninsula, to deoccupy another Ukrainian territories in Donetsk, Lugansk regions. Because the main reason is that if we will have the frozen conflict, it means that this war we postpone for our next generations. And only after the occupation of the territories, we can start to talk about how we'll live in post-war as a society.
Very quickly, just to specify what you're saying and some subjective feelings and thoughts that I have. On one hand, when we had an opportunity to go to Crimea, and everyone has their own Crimea, of course, and own memories from childhood, from seaside, from life there as well. That was one Crimea. Then when we lost Crimea temporarily, many of us started to look into Crimea from another angle. I don't know if you feel deeper or not deeper. How do you feel? How different is Crimea in the coverage after the occupation? What is Crimea, in our coverage after the occupation?
Coverage in Ukraine.
Yes. Yeah. What is the story? What is the story of Crimea?
Yeah.
Is it just, the place where we cannot get the story of the occupation and of the Russian regime there, or is it also a story about life there as well?
Yeah. Before 2014, mostly it was a story about a Ukrainian touristic corner, about some memories from Crimea, memories from your vacations for many of Ukrainians. After 2014, Crimea it's about the people. It's about Ukrainians, it's about Crimean Tatars, it's about pro-Ukraine activists, it's about human stories. And as for me, this one, it was a huge challenge in the mindset of Ukrainian society. And now when we talk about Crimea, we talk first of all, not only about territory, we talk about people. And it's my position that in every activities that we do for Crimea, we should bring the topic of the human life, human beings, and topic of Crimean population, Crimean inhabitants in the corner. Because, you know, I talk with people in Crimea every day. And most popular question to me is where will back to Ukraine? From different generations, from the people from the different areas of Crimea. And it's about our common responsibility to these people.
So it's the editorial effort that we all need to take in covering the occupied territories. Kateryna, in your opinion, where did the war and the occupation of the parts of eastern Ukraine, of Luhansk and Donetsk region, left these territories in our coverage? We're media people here, we're journalists. Do you feel that the coverage is poor? Do you feel that even since 2014, I'm not saying about 2022, of course the situation changed dramatically, that losing access means also losing coverage?
Thank you very much, Angelina, and good evening, everyone. I would agree with Alim saying that on the one hand, okay, I should also disclaim immediately that I am biased. I'm a researcher, so I'm in the topic. Yeah? I'm all the time kind of boiling in the topic. So
it doesn't mean that you're biased. It means that you're professional.
No, I want to say that when you're asking, for example, your initial question was that whether we lost these territories mentally, whether we kind of gave up on them.
Yeah.
And I can say my circle did not. The circle which I study, right? But I cannot say about the whole population. I mean, if we look at the surveys, then of course no one would succeed territories and people, but then what people actually think, everyone, I cannot comment on that. But I can tell you that in my kind of bubble, no, of course, I mean, these territories are extremely important because ceding them, giving them up would mean betraying our compatriots who actually, some of them lost their lives defending these territories. So it's absolutely out of the question. And now, as for the coverage, I would say the following. I think that on the one hand, we rediscovered Ukraine's East, sometimes called under this umbrella, incorrect umbrella term Donbass. I would prefer Ukraine's East and Crimea as well, because there were more publications, including non-fiction, and I don't mean just my book, but many other books, well, relatively many other books, in comparison to what we had about Ukraine's regions, but specifically occupied regions. So this was Crimea. We have fiction and non-fiction, interest towards Crimean Tatar literature, Crimean Tatar studies, generally books on Crimea and research on Crimea, and the same regards Ukraine's East. What I kind of saw less was that actually we speak about Ukraine's East, occupied Ukraine's East, as something that we lost, but in fact only 30% of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts were occupied. Well, not only 30%, that's a big territory, but and two oblast centers, so Donetsk and Lugansk. But other than that, I mean, 70% were not occupied, and I think we kind of maybe in the bigger picture there was again not so much coverage of what was going on in these territories beyond those interested. That's why I'm telling I'm biased because I'm interested, yet, and not everyone is interested. So I would say that I saw a blossom of civil society organizations, grassroots organizations in the free territories of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. I mean, basically in almost every city I can name, there was some kind of organization of various kinds. So environment, human rights, religious organizations, youth kind of creative hubs, and so on and so forth. And I think that those who wanted to know did know. So there were some kind of portals who highlighted these local stories, like Svoyi City, for example. But other than that, I would say that it was still niche knowledge. Yeah. So answering your question precisely, Angelina, I would say that we rediscovered some stories and we rediscovered some people, especially those who dislocated, so who moved and became internal displaced persons, IDPs. So there was this surge of interest towards, all kinds of people, so artists, intellectuals, academics, researchers, activists, all those whose voices were unfortunately amplified by the fact that they left the occupied territories, like Igor Kozlovsky, whom we commemorate today, like Stanislav Aseyev, who was in captivity with him, Ukrainian writer, member of PEN Ukraine, and many others. But whether there was this attention to free territories in the East, not so much. Whether we actually know what is going on in occupation, really, really very little. And I think this is for good reason saying, as a researcher, I would absolutely reject any kind of, insights data for the sake of security of these data providers. So it's absolutely out of the question to me, to try and pretend that I'm making research in the occupied territories. This is completely against any ethical considerations, even if it's online, right? If I have chat, for example, with a person, no, not at all, never. But what we also get now, how we could get access to data, is when people left occupation after some time. And some people left occupation after 8 years, for example, after 9 years. And that's how we know about, for example, Ukraine's partisans who operated all this time in Ukraine's east, and probably in the Crimea, I just know about East more. So with this absolute lack of data, for example, on the population structure, right? We know how many people, more or less, how many IDPs we had in 2014, and then we could also calculate the IDPs we had more or less in the territories, from the territories where Russia advanced in 2022. But what exactly is going on in the occupied territories? No, what age of people? How many men were mobilized? How many children were stolen and what is the English word? Deported. Thank you very much. Deported to Russia. I mean, this is the kind of knowledge vacuum, data vacuum, which is also would be important for us to fill, but currently we cannot. Also, in order to prepare reintegration strategies, for example, how many children living in occupation we have to educate. Yeah, we have lack of this knowledge.
Thank you, Kateryna. We'll get back to the coverage. I mean, the question of what we cover, what we need to cover, what needs to be covered in a second. Anton, you, as a photographer, as a journalist, you pitch your story. Also to the foreign media. You've been covering Donbass for many years. Do you feel, Kateryna already mentioned that Donbass, unfortunately, and Crimea became a story, a war story, an occupation story. Is there something else that you can really tell to the world about the occupied territories or about Donbass before 2022? Except war.
Let's dive in a context a little bit. So, if the Crimea story, personally for me, and with all due respect, is absolutely clear that Crimea is a clear victim of Russian imperialism, and the annexation fact was cleared and checked even in United Nations. Donbass was always considered as a troublemaker in Ukraine. I'm from Yanakiev, small industrial city near Donetsk, where President Yanukovych from, and the dictator who did some foolish actions, which inflamed Maidan, and after that Russia used that situation to capture Crimea. So Donbass was always in that internal tension, and there was always conversation about the stigma, and that actually turned Donbass in some shady zone. I'm talking about now specifically about occupied territories, which were captured by proxy forces led by Russians in 2014, and Donbass became at some point of history a trading card to buy more peace for Ukraine in Minsk when agreements were signed. However, this story didn't work at all. Even if we are speaking about with a vocabulary of international organizations, occupied territories of Donbass were always called NGCA, non-government control areas, the place where Ukraine lost control. But it wasn't lost. Ukraine was kicked out from there in a very violent and brutal way. I made this picture in March of 2014, and it displays you a pro-Ukrainian protest of 10,000 people gathered under Ukrainian flags on the central square, on Lenin Square in Donetsk at that moment of time. And a week later, Ukrainian activist Dmytro Chernyavsky was brutally killed during the fights. 2 weeks after, there was a march on central streets, on Artema Street from Donetsk, and it was brutally attacked by separatists. And I was eyewitnessing how police is giving up their batons and shields to so-called protesters. They were not like original rooted protesters from Donetsk. It was clearly in staged special operation conducted by Russian special forces. Later, after MH17 Malaysian airline plane was shot near the city of Torres, I was abducted by people who were FSB agents, and they were torturing me for 5 days in the basement. And it was not some local Ukrainians. It was Russian proxy forces operating there. And if we are switching about to the story of the Axis, like covering Donetsk even through so-called Russian Spring, it was almost impossible. Ukrainian journalists from national TV stations or freelancers, they were on the manhunt there.
We'll get to the access just in a second, but let me just, I really want to hear your thought about that. So after 2014 and before 2022, now with, you know, this huge global interest in what is happening in Donbass, how difficult was it for you to pitch the stories for, you know, for foreign media about Donbass, you know, without harsh fightings, without, you know, all that sells, so to say, the blood, the fighting and everything? How hard was it for you to maintain this interest in Donbass and what is happening there without, you know, harsh, violent?
It was easy. No one cared. If we're talking about 2014, we have this oligarch history of Donetsk and Euro 2012, which actually mapped Donetsk on the European map when a lot of foreign tourists arrived. But before that, it was a land of depression, industrialization, some illegal mining, some illegal drug dealing, and oligarch works who were seizing post-Soviet assets to get in power. If we are talking about like Donbass on the mental map of Europe, till 2012, no one really cared. It was a very niche story.
No, I'm asking after, you know, just before the invasion, like when the fighting wasn't so really harsh, like 17, 18, 19, you know, when Minsk negotiations were on the map, and, you know, it seemed like many media, well, the media interest went down, and I'm wondering how responsible all are we for the fact that, you know, what came in 2022 and with the level of coverage and understanding what is in mind of people and how Russia is acting there.
I will put it in this way. If we are talking specifically about temporary occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, all independent media were kicked out from there in 2016. If you are a Western journalist who wanted to cover something, if you had a background of covering earlier stories, you had no chances to obtain their accreditations and literally to get access. Only young freelancers and people without a story, or people who were consuming pro-Russian narratives, had an opportunity to be present in Donetsk. This situation somehow miraculously changed just before invasion when a couple of international TV crews from respected channels as Al Jazeera and CBC got to Donetsk just before invasion. And it was cleared by, this was sanctioned by Moscow. All these people got approval in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get there, as those journalists or journalists from other stations getting now to Mariupol and to other places. So if we are talking about independent journalism, it's only a low-key, low-profile work with some sources. But if we are talking about interest somewhere in Europe, it was hardly pitched at least something, some more or less a big story. It was literally, you can't sell it. It's just you struggle a lot for nothing.
Thank you. So now having all the interest and all eyes, you know, on Ukraine and, for example, on Mariupol, and having a very respected crew from a German public broadcaster, CDF, entering Mariupol from Russia and filing a report, actually it was a live report from Mariupol, saying live that this is an occupied city by Russia, it was bombarded by Russia, you know, showing the images from Mariupol, but also, my opinion, getting many things wrong. How do you feel, you know, about respected, you know, professional media entering occupied territories through Russia, so obviously breaking Ukrainian laws, but still trying to file the report, to do the story? I'm not going into the story, I mean, I'm not going to everything that CDF got wrong. I mean, for obvious reasons, I mean, we can talk about it as well, but I just wonder about the fact that, for example, a crew is granted this kind of access. Under which circumstances do you think they should go for it? Alim, maybe start with you. Or whether you believe at all that they should do that.
First of all, when we talk about this war and about the situation, and when we talk about international law and that Russia broke international law, and we should be honest with ourselves. If we give a chance to break Ukrainian law and to have this interviews in temporary occupied territories, it's a first question. Second question is about the question what I want to see and what I want to cover. I will give an example of Crimea, of course. In Crimea, Russians tried to build so-called Potemkinsky villages, and the main goal to show the illusion of normal life in Crimea. And of course, before the full-scale invasion, the journalists, some of them who come to Crimea, they cover these Potemkinsky villages. But the topic, what I can cover and about what I can talk, I have a few perspectives and recommendations. I suggest to look deeper into the topics of the nature of the occupation and the nature of these territories. In the example of Crimea, when we talk about the human rights violations in Crimea, it's only the tip of iceberg. When we talk about the ground of all of these violations, it's a recolonization of the peninsula. And recolonization of the peninsula means not only the militarization of peninsula by Russian army, but it's also about militarization of consciousness. It's also about the changing of identity. We talk a lot about settlement colonization. when 70,000 inhabitants of Crimea left Crimea. But we also should talk about the reserve trend, when from Russia comes at least 700,000 new inhabitants. It 1/3 of all of inhabitants of Crimea.
People who now can call Crimea their home,
Of
yes,
course.
and later, and
Yeah.
their children.
Yeah. And
But getting to the question, Alim, imagining, I mean, there was a period when foreign crews could go to Crimea, like legally from Ukraine, and not do whatever they want, but still there wasn't a legal opportunity to do that. Now with the fighting, of course, it's impossible, but there is a way from Russia, and some of the journalists, they really do take favor and they take this route. How do you feel about it?
Sorry, colleagues, but for me it's a crucial question: legally or illegally? Yeah. When we want to play the fair play, yeah, we should do every our step legally, and it means about Crimea. Another question: how I can cover the topic of Crimea or another temporary occupied territories without some any illegal actions.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we
you.
have an answer about it.
Yes, thank you. Very, very clear. Kateryna, in your opinion, I mean, seeing what we've seen through CDF's eyes or camera, so to say, in Mariupol, how precious is it, and how you think necessary was it for this crew to go there in this way, you know, and do this report in this way, the way they did?
Okay, I have to say that I'm a researcher and a journalist, and my perspective is that of a Ukrainian citizen. To be honest, to me it's maybe a bit harsh now, but to me it's outrageous to even kind of put it under question whether there are some cases when we actually could break Ukrainian law and go through Russia to get some story, because through this, first and foremost, the person who does it becomes complicit in normalizing occupation. And this is basically what CDF already did. Yeah, that's why we're having this conversation right now. It's no longer kind of a taboo to talk about it. We can talk about it. So talking about it, my opinion is, you become complicit in normalizing occupation. Occupation is death and torture. That's it. Yes, you kind of, a little bit, yeah, you hold this occupation by the hand. You say, it's okay, I can come, maybe I can show the life under occupation. But no, you don't show the life under occupation. You show what the occupying regime allows you to show. And I think the story of Gareth Jones actually is very helping here, right? He violated the conditions offered to him by the regime. He paid with his life. That's it. If you are ready, well, I don't know whether it's necessary to break the law to put your life at risk in order to show the truth. I mean, really, this is what the journalism is about. So I think it's impossible to show a true story in occupation working with the occupying regime. Just impossible. It's an oxymoron. I will stop here.
Thank you. Anton, I remember recently, you know, after this CDF case, talking to my fellow colleagues about it, and one of my friends told me, you know, if I had an opportunity to go to Auschwitz during the war and tell the story to the world about Auschwitz, I would do whatever it takes to do that, and just to tell the world what is happening there. I'm not comparing the current situation and life in Mariupol to Auschwitz. Obviously, that was a very, you know, rough comparison in our conversation, but it brings, you know, a discussion about situations in which journalism can break the law in order to bring a story which is essential. Do you think that story or that situation was essential, and what other, you know, situations could be, you imagine, you know, could be in order that you, for example, or some of your colleagues would do that or would have to do that?
Angelina, you started from that we don't dive into the story and won't discuss what has been displayed in the story and what is not, but actually this is a cornerstone of the question. And my question is, what does this reporting brings new to the table? Because to be honest, if we compare a report from Mariupol or report NBC from Crimea, who took a train and did some reporting from Sevastopol about attitudes to the war, and definitely they were followed by like five crews of FSB agents on every step, and probably they had some stuns there who were replying on interviews. But my question is, what does this reporting bring to the table? Does it create extra value, or it just confirms some statements of Russian propaganda? And another question, how does it confirm the statements of Russian propaganda? Because even if we're comparing like Tucker Carlson interview with Putin, it was a lot more revealing than the ZDF report from Mariupol, because like we just got that the dictator gone mad and he talks to camera like crazy things. However, like, what do you expect to see from this report? That life is going on? Yes, it is. And yeah, something is being rebuilt, some apartments being renovated, some real estate market exists. Some people from occupied territories, they go and skiing to Dambai in North Caucasus, and they go to Sochi to enjoy their vacation. All this happens. But the question is, what is another context? Like, why does this report doesn't tell the story of people who were arrested, civilians who were arrested on Azovstal factory and who remained in Mariupol? And a lot of people have remained in Mariupol after they've been arrested in Azovstal factory. What about those people who pass this punitive and absolutely humiliating process of filtration for being allegedly connected to Ukrainian symbols? I don't even... State, yeah. Not even symbol, even carrying some yellow and blue clothes. I'm not even talking about some acts of patriotism. So it's about this, how these reports are being framed and what do they bring. Of course, I would also did a lot to get to occupied territories and to bring a story, but my risk-reward model is definitely against it. After my detention and abductions, I understand that it would be a one-way ticket. And actually, some journalists in Ukraine, they attempted that. They tried to go to occupied territories,
and they vanished.
And now we are desperately looking for them, and they are missing because we can't find any trace of their existence. So, did it help? Not really, because like as a journalist here, as a community, we're getting more stress and concern, but we are not getting some verified information, and definitely we are not getting extra value from this effort. So pragmatically thinking, it's not even about the law. If the price worth it, if the story worth it, like especially if we're talking about foreign audiences, it's a lot of personal pain and ambivalence here as a being Ukrainian citizen, because when you're Ukrainian citizen, you have one set of feelings, but as a media professional who works for a decade only for international media outlets, you are looking on the processes through their lenses. And if I was my own foreign editor from some Western newsroom, I would send a person, but without repeating, with only one condition, without repeating the narratives of the propaganda there.
Thank you. I think it's essential, and many, well, for example, some of my foreign colleagues probably do not really realize the effect of the fact that this report was possible, like a signal to many others that, listen, this is possible, you can do it as well. Well, probably you have to go to Moscow and to speak to people, but frankly speaking, that's one, I mean, professionally speaking, and if we think about the audience, the general public who saw this picture that life in Mariupol goes on, and, well, Russia doesn't seem to be a monster, as, you know, as many say, also raises a question, you know, what was the essence of that story? I think that's a very fair argument. Thank you. Talking about the way how we cover, you know, and talking, well, we actually just all agreed that it's almost impossible physically to get there and to get a fair, real story. How do you imagine these stories from the occupied territories happening? You already, Anton, you already mentioned talking with, working with a network of undercover journalists, civil journalists. For many of them, by the way, like Stanislav Aseyev, he ended up in prison, and we are really all lucky that he got out alive. But Alim, does it seem like the only way out to cover the life of the occupied stories? I mean, sometimes simple things like prices, you know, which matter to people really, like, you know, electricity, bills, you know, public transport, things like that. Somebody has to report how it really works in Crimea, how it really works in Donetsk and Luhansk, things like that. What are the ways to report on that?
Every time when we talk about occupied territories and when we trying to report about the issues in occupied territories, first question, is it your material, your articles, is it safe for the people in occupied territories? It should be the first question. And in our activities, of course, I will take. Yeah, in our activities, it's the first question. But of course, we have different ways how to get the information from the temporary occupied territories. Yeah, you talk about the different networks, civil journalists. In Crimea is a huge network of civil journalists. Some of them, unfortunately, in Russian prison. And for example, I bring here the book of the stories of 11 civil journalists in Crimea who in a prison. And but we have the network of advocates who work with the families, who work with the political prisoners. Another way is to cooperate with the Ukrainian journalists, because Ukrainian journalists, as I know more deeper in Crimean issues, Ukrainian journalists can connect you with the people in Crimea, who can tell their own personal stories in a hidden way or openly. But one more, it's about the people who left Crimea after 2022. And I will explain that. It was in September 2022 when we have the new wave of this migration from Crimea, because on the forced mobilization of the people in temporary occupied territories. These people, it's spread in Europe, in different countries around the world, and they have a huge connection with Crimea, of course, because they're relatives in Crimea, etc., etc., etc. And they also can be the source of such human stories for you. As for me, it's now the main issue is how we can get these stories from Crimea.
Kateryna, we know you're not a journalist, but still, this is a professional question. How do you think, how do we cover these stories with no access physically?
I think there are two important things which I would like to add to what Alim said. One is the smartphone, or the smartphone rather than a usual old phone, can be a source of insecurity, a source of physical threat to people in occupation. Because if you are checked by the occupation police and they do whatever they want, so they check the phone, and if there are, for example, a dialogue with a journalist, saying some things, not necessarily super critical things. It can be anything. It can be, photo with a flag or with a pin, like Ukraine, something like this. This is enough to get you in detention. So people can be detented and tortured and killed for very, very, things which can, to us living in free democracies, seemingly safe, seemingly simple, but for these simple things, people can risk their lives. So it's very important when talking about how we communicate with people in occupation, even online. And in my research, I know that people living in occupation actually had another phone completely devoid of anything, so completely empty phone to go in the street, and then the kind of real phone would be only at home, for example. So that's just an important illustration to bear in mind. Another source of information, unfortunately, occupation did not start yesterday. So as I said, we have many people who left occupation not in 2014, but many years after it. So they are, the source of stories. They can also speak on the conditions of anonymity, but yes, these people are currently safe on Ukraine's free territory, so they can be the source of stories for you if we are talking about these things like prices and like transport and whatever.
Thank you. Thanks, Anton.
Like photography-wise, I have no job. Like if I can't get there and to see the scene and frame the shot and press the button, like I have no job. As a producer on different roles, there are some ways how we do it. It's like milking your sources on the ground, some people you know, but you can't endanger your parents, you can't endanger people you know because you know how it will end it for them, and it's finally backfires you, so you need, like, it's developing sources and people you don't know, it's chatting with people by anonymous accounts in some social media, in like doing a lot of a synth operation, covert operation. But to be honest, if we are talking about journalism, some like factual journalism is quite hard. Like getting a factual proven story, it's quite a lot of investigative effort, and it's not the field actually where I'm so much good. But we did a lot of stories in the Globe and Mail, the newspaper I was actively cooperating when the invasion has started, and continue to cover Ukraine for them right now. We, in newly occupied territories, we managed to get a couple of strong stories about people had been tortured, people had been detained, people had been shot, and like we verified them. However, like it's still, you always doubt yourself about a lot of questions, from endangering of your source, from the dilemma, how do you prove it, and how the story is already framed by your source. And that's dilemma, it's, when it goes to editor's level, it's yet another fight with your editor of fact-checking and bringing the relevance of the story. And if we're talking now when the media interest is fading, it's way more harder to do, because when you will deliver news, you can gain some results, and now it could be a long-term fishing and without any results. So it's very slow, it's very low-key, and that's it, and a lot of hard work.
It's interesting that occupation is not only about, I mean, ideology obviously is at the corner, but it's not only about ideological things and indoctrinations, it's also about how it breaks the social infrastructure and, how simple things for people vanish. I mean, your doctor whom you used to go, or the hospital that used to be run in some specific way, and now it's different. It's the way it's run in Russia, and it's absolutely different than in Ukraine. It's the way, some services, municipal services or state services, so-called state services work. It's many, many social, like small things which vanish or get broken and which really lack coverage. And what I, as a journalist and editor, what I found challenging, because I worked in a newsroom that extensively covered life in occupied territories, and I worked in a newsroom that didn't used to cover any life in occupied territories except for the statements from the Ministry of Defense. What I faced is, on one hand, is lack of knowledge how you tell these stories. So maybe we would like to tell a story about Donetsk or life in Luhansk, but we actually don't know how. What is the vocabulary? We lack the vocabulary. We lack sources and instruments to verify information, we lack courage to do that. This is what I've met among sometimes senior editors. They were really, they were really lacking knowledge and sometimes courage to do that. So I have a question for you. I know it's quite professional on one hand, whether we need some, additional education about it. That's one question, but second question is about self-censorship. I really felt some journalists and some newsrooms really tried to stay away from stories about life in occupied territories exactly because of the fear of, normalizing life. That if you make stories about life in occupied territories, it looks like you normalize it. So it's better to tell stories only about war, about human rights violations, and things like that. What do you think about it?
Yeah, of course, after occupation, after the full-scale invasion, our lives continue, yeah? And we are living our own life, but of course, these lives, we are living in completely different context. And one of suggestion is to maybe give better understanding to your audiences, who is these people who live in these territories. I just give, one more example about Crimean Tatars. A lot of articles about human rights violations, about the situation in Crimea, etc., etc., etc. But one of the main questions that I faced in abroad: who are you Crimean Tatars? And give more information about identity, about history of these territories, and give this broader context about these people in these territories. I think it's one of the ways how to bring the better understanding for your audiences about Ukraine at all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Kateryna. What's your point on that?
Alim, I think you made a very important point, because in general, coverage of human stories, when we zoom in very much on them, they kind of avoid this macro picture. And indeed, I think this macro picture, there's so much to be told about Ukraine generally, war more specifically, in many countries, that indeed, I think this is a great piece of advice. As for self-censorship, I would treat the example which you gave not as self-censorship, but as professionalism. So can I go and make the coverage without breaking the law of the country I report on? No. Can I guarantee my own security, or kind of provide my own security? Huge no. Can I put in jeopardy the people in the occupied territories? Yes. So can I guarantee their security? No. No's from all respects. So is this professionalism? Would it be professional to go and do the coverage? No. So to me, it's just unprofessional, not about self-censorship.
No, but not about going there. I mean, there are reports, for example, there are blasts in Donetsk. Mm-hmm. It's hard to verify them. So what, do we just keep silence about what is happening in Donetsk because we cannot verify it? So it's about an effort. I mean, it's hard, but you have to report on what is happening in Donetsk. It's your city. So you have to find, and what I've met is that, we cannot verify it, so we're not reporting. And you are left in a situation when a huge media is not reporting on Donetsk at all, or on Lugansk at all, because they don't know how. They don't know how to verify. They don't know how to name, the LPR or DPR, something like that. And mm-hmm. it is leaving us without any reports from these territories. Not going, of course. Going is impossible.
Okay. Well, from a researcher's perspective, and now again, I'm not going into media realm, I'm going to social science realm. If I have unreliable data, I don't use it. I know this is not the answer that you expect probably, but if I have unreliable data, I don't use it, that's it.
I'm not expecting any answers.
Or, I don't know, I can make a data analysis from Telegram channels reporting, and collect them and put it on the Excel sheets, and I don't run them through software, but then what is the purpose of my research? Am I just taking for granted what is written there and presenting it as a reliable data? Again, I mean, you know, there are enough of mistakes in social science research and twisted kind of manipulative things already without such stories. So in my practice as a researcher, I don't use unverified data that I can prove.
Me neither, as a journalist, I have to say. Anton, your point on that. Have you had ever a feeling among, well, we are Ukrainian journalists, so we're talking about Ukrainian media community, that there is a certain level of self-censorship, or, you know, any other feelings that you have in terms of coverage of life in occupied territories?
Like, for first, I would like to start from the position that professional journalist, it's not only, he doesn't have only a right for free speech, but he also has a right for the silence. And if he makes a decision to be silent about some things, it might be driven by some professional matters, I would say. However, to report independently from occupied territory, about occupied territories in Ukraine, and especially if we're talking about Eastern Ukraine, where the most of my focus is and where I'm originally from, it's impossible. It's not a free country. There is no free media in Ukraine on such scale, and there is no such media solidarity which guarantees the security for the journalists to do this job. Like, if I will start to spread narratives about the Ukrainian army shelling Donetsk, and in a result of indiscriminate fire, like 25 people died on some bus station or wherever, if I will get a solid proof data and the story will be fair, I will end my day in interrogation room of Security Service of Ukraine. And I have no doubts about this, especially considering due to the latest news. And I have zero illusions about that. So the threat of being unbiased reporter in some pure way of journalism, it doesn't exist in Ukraine. But moreover, it's not really necessary right now. Because
what is not necessary to report on a blast in Donetsk?
No, there is a measure and understanding. So this so-called self-censorship, and I'm telling so-called specifically for this situation, it's driven by another motives and another matters. There are another stories to report right now as a clear act of aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine.
But it's not like one story against another. It's like all the stories matter. If we say that, you know, the Crimean breach was blown up, and we cannot go there. We cannot like independently verify it unless, you know, Budanov says, yeah,
or you get a footage on some satellite data or wherever.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so there are ways. You see, this is what I'm trying. This is what I'm trying to say, that there are ways somehow to cover what is happening on our territories, on the territories which we regard as ours and where our people are staying. For example, many families of our fellow citizens are staying in occupied territories, and you know, you get a call from your grandparents saying, "We hear blasts." I mean, do you feel
we lost people?
You know, of course, or we lost people. So this is something that needs obviously to be reported, but there is a struggle to do it, you know, in a professional way.
So for first, there is definitely some security risks here highlighted. The second thing is, it's about, in my opinion, you should never forget about the root of the evil. So, and to give the whole picture, you can't cut some phrase out of
the context. You know,
yeah, you can't put the context away from the fact. Like, for example, it was recently on one of the mainstream news agency, when it was a blast of Donetsk, it was a breaking news. But at the same time, it was 5 rockets attack over Ukraine, which were not breaking news. And that changes the frame and the optics. How do we view on this war, because it's like for professional journalists, and especially for professional journalists who spent a decade in Ukraine, it's not a problem to remember what is the original route, how the story has been escalated, how it developed, how the dynamics of the conflict. The average reader from your country doesn't care, and I can bet it that he doesn't care, and he doesn't even know where Donetsk is exactly. So, and if you put a context for him aside from the fact, that could lead to very...
Manipulation, yeah.
It's not a manipulation even, it's misinformation. Mm-hmm. It's not disinformation, but it's misinformation. It's misleading your audience about the course of actions happening in Ukraine. And that's why I'm always demanded to attentions, and I have a lot of fights with copy editors for the wordings.
Headlines especially, or leads.
I can't impact on the headlines, but I'm fighting for my captions, for my pictures, and I'm fighting for the wordings and the stories I write, because it's not, and my position is clear, probably my English is not so good, but when I decided to put this word exactly in this sentence, in this connotation, it means that I read vocabularies already 5 times and was looking for specific synonym which describes the situation. And I don't tolerate adjustments here. So this is my way to defend facts.
And actually your work, oh, absolutely. Word matters, even and especially when you see words in the captions or headlines, like an editor asks you, so what's the difference? War is conflict, conflict is war. So we go with conflict. Why are you so emotional about conflict? And it's not because we are emotional, it's because conflict and war are 2 different words. And I would remind an anecdote which actually Gulliver, my good colleague, we faced in Donetsk a lot of time when the local authorities were pissed off on the word separatist. They literally were so much triggered, and so like, you can't call us in Donetsk. In DNR. Like, you can't call us separatists. Okay, guys, officially to your propaganda that you established here, you hold a referendum in a desire to separate from Ukraine. If you decided to get separated, so you are separatists. You're not like fighters for freedom or something like, or whatever, or liberators or whatever. You are separatists because you decided like a lesser part decided to disconnect from a bigger part, to separate. And the language in Western world works in this way. It describes the process. However, it's created a lot of internal tensions and discussions, and a lot of journalists were banned and stripped with their accreditations on occupied territories. So even this anecdotal situation just describes how sometimes wording can be a cornerstone of the confrontation. Gulliver, we'll get back to war and conflict when we'll have Q&A just in a second, but let me probably move towards the ending of our discussion. I would like all 3 of you to think about the moment when we'll get our lands back and we'll have to look into the eyes of many people who stayed there for a number of reasons. Some of them supported Russia, some of them did not. So they stayed at their homes for a number of reasons, and we will have to speak to them, to talk to them. We will have to live in one country. How do you imagine that? I mean, it's a $1 million question, it's constitution, it's lots of things, but still, just keeping in mind that we are reporting not only for the global audience, for Ukrainian internal audience, but also for the people who are reading us in occupied territories. What are the words that we can find for them? How can we reach them? And what do you think really resonates with them now, for example? Alim.
people in temporary occupied territories, all of them are subjects. And we should build this subject-subject relations. And we have a lot of homework now as a Ukrainian society, also Ukrainian state. It means that we should focus on education in temporary occupation territories, on cultural issues, but also we should involve the people from temporary occupied territories to build these policies on the territory on the time after the deoccupation. And today, when I talked with the people in Crimea, they said, "Yeah, we are waiting, but give us a framework, the frame, yeah, what is legal for us now, what is illegal, and it's our work now, because through these 10 years we have this very clear frame for the people in temporary occupied territories. And when we talk about different processes, call it reconciliation, etc., 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 we
transitional justice.
Transitional justice. It's about one part. Yeah, another part. It's about this people-to-people relations. Mm-hmm. It's important to have these ties now, because after what we have now in temporary occupied territories, after this 10 years, Russia gives new heroes for the people in temporary occupied territories. Now we have our own heroes, and we should talk with the people and give them understanding that occupation is colonization, because now Ukraine, we have two different processes inside our country. One country is have this anti-colonial struggle and the decolonial process, and another part of country has this new colonial process. And that's why we have this connection with the people on the ground. It will be very hard to bring Ukraine agenda, bring Ukraine law, bring Ukraine understanding of the future for the temporary occupied territories.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Kateryna?
I will take it from here. I think it is important to communicate to Ukrainians living in temporarily occupied territories that living in occupation is not a crime. It is important because Russian propaganda works exactly against this. It says Ukrainian state gave up on you, you are not welcome back, and so on and so forth. And from stories, from human stories, for example, from Kherson and Kherson Oblast, some people were afraid that once Ukraine regains the territories where they stayed, there will be some kind of either negative attitude or even some kind of punishment. But on the other hand, it is extremely important to define what is the crime of collaboration and what are the degrees of these crimes and punishment. And it is very important to communicate this again across very well. So there are some people complicit and there are some people innocent, and they should know already where they belong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Anton?
I don't want to speculate on the future for first, and if we're talking about this concept of inclusion, tolerance, transitional justice, etc., etc., it's the work of the international organizations which will spend, I believe, billions on this topic here in Ukraine, as they try to spend like before the invasion.
Why not ours? I think it's our job. Why international?
It's our job as well,
It's our
but I
country.
mean, I deliver discussion on the concepts and promoting some working concepts, laws, and to the professional in that field. But I will repeat you in the word of Professor Kozlovsky, whom you mentioned. And he was also one of my teachers, and he was an expert, probably the most profound expert on religion science in Ukraine. And he always taught one thing: the only thing which kept my spirit alive when I was imprisoned, it was love. The only thing which can help to return our people back is love. Ukraine shouldn't love its own territories. Ukraine should love its own people. And this way, probably it sounds a little bit hippie, but that's the only way which opens the roads and paths to building trust, and to building forgiveness, and to building justice. Like the root would be love to Ukrainian citizens who got educated of their bad lives in very bad circumstances. And that's it. And yeah, there's nothing to add to that.
First of all, thank you so much for such a great remembrance of Professor Kozlovsky. I would probably add also that education is essential. We already have generations of young people who do not remember what is Ukraine, and giving them a chance to get to know what Ukraine is about, somehow getting them here, you know, showing them around. That will be also a great start for us, media, people from media and journalists, giving them content. I mean, maybe they lack Ukrainian content which they think is interesting, is engaging. Maybe they watch Russian dramas and Russian TikToks and YouTubes and bloggers because they have, you know, around, they have this in their access, but they do not have something that they think is also interesting for them in Ukrainian or from Ukraine. That is also a task for us to think how to engage them in Ukrainian life and show them that, you know, Ukrainians, not only Russians travel and watch Hollywood movies, Ukrainians also do that. You know, entertaining them from, you know, for simple things like that. But that's another topic. Oksana, we will probably, if you don't mind, as the hostess of this evening, go to the questions from the audience.
Yeah, this works. Please raise your hand. I will give you a mic. I hope you have some questions. Please introduce yourself when you ask.
My name is Davide De Luca. I'm an Italian journalist, and I have a question for Kateryna in particular, but whoever wants to answer, of course. And my question is, do you think that talking about collaborationists and complicity with Russian occupation authority, do you think that the Ukrainian government is not doing enough and too many people are getting like not persecuted, or the opposite?
But Ukraine right now cannot prosecute people who are on the occupied territory. So I'm thinking that the discussion on the collaboration, what constitutes collaboration crimes, on the legislative basis are ongoing. And there are different views. So what I'm saying is that we lack clarity on that. And probably there will be also some changes before we liberate the rest of territory. So it is very important that it is what we see from the occupied territories is that there is a huge demand for justice on the liberated territories. For example, those who saw people collaborating, witness people collaborating with the occupation authorities, they want them to be prosecuted, but it's not always possible for many reasons. Sometimes legislative, sometimes administrative. There are not enough judges, for example, not enough evidence. So this is something which will break the societal fabric to begin with, and which is a matter of justice generally. So it is something that Ukrainian law should be very clear about. And I think that there should be done more legislative work on defining what collaboration is and what is a crime and what is not.
So, if we're talking about collaboration, that's about misdemeanor and felonies, and there are some already discussion in the criminal court, but I would like to underline the role of local journalists and journalists from the communities who know their community and journalists who've been in occupation with their communities. Because those people know who is who, and those people can deliver testimonies and to the public. Because in some small, as we see in some small cities and towns, liberated cities and towns, like corruption fixes a lot of questions with collaborators. And it's like some investigations are being stopped, some cases are being ruined in the court or even on the trials before the court. And only public pressure from journalists, from local journalists, it's highlights the cases and keeps the names on agenda for law enforcement agencies. Because if we, like, transitional justice, it's a very complicated topic. All the countries who were in face with transitional justice, like, they have their own victories, but they have a lot of losers. But the role of the local journalism is very important. And I think this peer-to-peer connection of international journalists who are interested in this topic and keeping connections, peer-to-peer connection to local journalists from the communities can stream this discussion in a more effective way to achieve justice, I believe.
Okay. Some other questions, or just, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this is so much a question or a remark, but I think, with all due respect, Kateryna, that there aren't very many editors-in-chief of international media who think there's no way we'd send somebody to occupied parts of Ukraine because it's illegal under Ukrainian law. They might have other reasons why they wouldn't do that, but the principle generally is, you know, in lots of cases, for the sake of journalism, you break the law. You mentioned Gareth Jones. He was sadly killed, but there are plenty of people who've committed crimes in order to reveal things and have got away with it. And even in a very much more less dramatic case, summer 2022, a team from France too went to Mariupol illegally under Ukrainian law. They even went on some kind of Russian press tour, and their report showed a little bit of what the Russians are showing, and then they showed the mass graves. And this is a team who went on to do some absolutely terrible reporting, and they're not really people I admire in general, but French people watching mainstream TV that evening had heard that there had been thousands of people killed in Mariupol and that there were mass graves. They'd seen satellite pictures, and then they saw them filmed close up on this report. And I tend to think that it was worth it. And that's why sort of one point to say why at times it can be worth it, and why I'm wondering whether anyone in Ukraine might think that Ukraine might consider a system of giving permits, as it were, saying, okay, you have our blessing to travel through Russia, and that way the Ukrainian side would be in communication with these teams and would be able to say to them before they go, please take these things into consideration, please remember what you can't see, you know, and all of. Is that something that might be an option? Oh, sorry, my name's Gulliver Cragg. I'm correspondent for France 24, not for France 2, just to be clear.
Maybe I'll let the speakers answer this question, and then if you don't mind also.
Yeah, sorry. I normally hate people who make comments instead of asking questions.
Yes. But you also, if you want to pick up on the question. Okay, maybe Gulliver, maybe I will, because
go ahead.
You know, it's very much different now compared to the situation before 2022, because there were efforts from journalists, from media community, you know, to get into any kind of group. For example, with the OSCE representatives at that time, we did have a monitoring mission of the OSCE working in occupied territories. At least if they have access, why we, under their, you know, security or in their patrols, cannot go there? For some people, this is their hometowns. For example, like for Anton, I'm not saying that Anton would wish to go to Yanakeva in 2020 or 2021. I don't know. Maybe you did. Maybe you. Maybe, yes, but again, there was a desire from the media community. I wouldn't say it was very popular, but I was in the group, for example, that would really wished to do that, but it was for many reasons it was impossible. At certain point, it got also impossible for foreign media as well. So we couldn't get there. I assume that during live offensive, live fighting, it's impossible just for military reasons. Nobody can guarantee, security, and there are no monitoring missions, where we want to go. Mariupol obviously has no international organizations whatsoever. So I think there could be a proactive, proactive something from the media community to ask, and this is what I'm saying, for example, our foreign colleagues, if you do have this opportunity to stress that you would also like to take Ukrainian journalists with you, and there are journalists who wish to go to, well, obviously Mariupol and other occupied territories. But I would say that it could be on agenda when the harsh fighting is.
Right now, it's probably more dangerous for Ukrainian citizens or even people like me who live in Ukraine. I also think that I would recommend the people who go be people who are not going to be based in Ukraine afterwards, nor in Russia, but who would like to go one time to those occupied territories.
There could be conditions for a number of,
not need to keep their Moscow accreditation afterwards, because that's obviously a factor in motivating people to not take too many risks.
I would say this is a very nice and beautiful idea, but unfortunately media are competitive, and what they're fighting for is an exclusive from Mariupol, and nobody cares, who can get there as well. So
I certainly don't recommend people doing live reports from there.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure they will. That's the thing. We probably need to be ready for the fact that people will.
Yeah, this is why we did a statement condemning this report from CDF. I mean the public broadcaster. So there is a hand right there. Sorry, Anton, you wanted to...
I just wanted to add that it's like here international... talking from the position of Ukrainian journalists, I mean, like, it's impossible. It's a war. It's a pure war, and it's like black and white. And however, international journalist community, they still have this chance to be above the fight. At some stances, and some Western journalists continue to cover Russia, like New York Times and like some TV stations from Europe and America. So there is a chance to get there and to bring some value and to dig some pieces of information from there, which really displays the brutality of the regime there. I mean, it's just about a long analysis and a lot of homework before running this process. But if this discussion will start in Ukraine about going to Russia or in Ukrainian journalism community, I think it would just generate yet another stress discussion and adds some more tension inside Ukrainian society, which also like now facing hard time of the turbulence, considering the news we are gathering from the front lines.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, you've mentioned Auschwitz, and you've cited somebody who said if he could go back in time and warn.
Yeah, that was just an imaginary situation.
Okay, I just wanted to add. I'm Elena Gorges. I'm working for the German Public Radio as a freelancer. I just wanted to add that there has been somebody who went to Auschwitz. It's Witold Pilecki, a Polish guy, and he went there in 1940, and he got out. He built a resistance in Auschwitz, and he got out in 1943, and he warned in London the Polish exile government, so everybody knew, and all the most people who died in Auschwitz could have been prevented if the worldwide community would have decided to act. So I think we know a lot of facts already, and I don't know if it makes a difference if you collaborate with the aggressor to get a story.
Thank you so much. But I also think it makes a difference to see a grave with thousands of Christs and not to see it. I do also believe in the power of images, but again, I have no ready answer to the story of TV2, because I think my colleague said that the crew entered Mariupol like on a Russian tank or something. They were embedded with the Russian crew.
That might be a different trip. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
They did a terrible thing in Donbass where they were embedded with Russian soldiers.
Yeah.
The same people, but that was a different trip later on.
Anyway, thank you so much for bringing this up. Thank you. Any other comments, remarks, questions? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lepers. I'm a French freelancer and I work for the Europe-Ukraine desk as well. It's also a comment because I hear very much what you say and I totally understand your point of view, and I also stand with Gulliver, hoping that some journalists do care about how they do their job going there. I just want to... It's an argument I often use with Ukrainian journalists, and I don't know if it's clear for Ukrainians that from outside, people don't know about Crimea, don't know about these temporarily occupied territories. And my fear as a journalist is if the topic cannot be covered well and thus disappears because it cannot be reported, it just disappears in the mind of people outside of Ukraine. So I don't have the solution here, but I definitely know that French audiences don't trust only Ukrainian people telling about these territories, maybe for wrong reasons, because they have been taught that journalism should be point of view A, point of view B, but this is how it's happening outside of Ukraine. People don't know about it, and I don't have the solution.
Thank you. Maybe you want to react?
Yeah. One of the solutions is to talk with these underground initiatives in temporary occupied territories, like Crimean Solidarity in Crimea, who can talk publicly about the situation. Yeah, of course they not will cover any of the situation in Crimea, but human stories, some facts from the ground they can give.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
I will firstly add, if you are already here and you understand the importance of this war for your homeland, you need to work on this solution as well. Because like Ukraine handling its battle from one side, but keeping audiences informed and why this war is important for your countries, for your people, for your readers, for your trusted audiences, it's like, it's your dilemma. Like we can, as Ukrainians, we can urge you to hear our voices as much as possible, to trust our official statements on unofficial statements, but only eyewitnessing what is happening here and telling to the audiences would give a chance to your nations to make a right choice how to react and how to secure themselves in this time of the global turbulence.
Thank you, Anton. Yes, there is a hand, another hand.
Hi, I'm Francesco Martino from Bulgaria. Also working for n-ost. I have a question for Anton. Just wanted to be sure I understood correctly what you said a bit earlier. That is that here in Ukraine, that's what I understood, so that's why I'm asking. For several issues, there is no real freedom in speaking about it, and that if you had to cover something like bombardment of Donetsk, that would be, apart from the opportunity of doing it and the necessity to put it in context, you would also be the subject of the interest of the services here in Ukraine. Did I got it right or not? Sorry, I wanted to make sure I understood it correctly.
Like I would urge to read my CPJ case on that, and I would not add extra. However, Ukraine is in the war, and the war is informational sphere, is a part of the direct war, which has a lot of limitations on journalists in this country.
There are cases when there were when there were
no CPJ
no
case, so
implications. Yeah. And Well, the colleagues don't know, obviously. Anton was questioned by security services. It's his case, so it's you can read about it more. But I, personally speaking, I didn't hear concerns from my other colleagues that they would, for example, that they would be afraid to report on something happening in Donetsk because there might be implications for them. But again, I mean, this is not like a reason and consequences relation. Anton's case is really reported, but at the same time, I frankly strongly believe that we should be reporting on occupied territories and do all the efforts we can to report on what is happening. Is that an answer to your question? Did you get anything?
Yeah, maybe, no, I really wanted, no, it was not a rhetorical question, I really wanted to be sure. I don't know if you have will to comment on it, like part of the media environment in Ukraine, you know, like how do you feel about that? I'm posing the question to the other panelists, you know, to this kind of situation, just curious.
Yeah, we have to proceed from the fact that this war is not the war between two countries. This war between two systems, yeah, from the authoritarian system and democratic. And when we're trying to put in equal position these two systems, it's unlogical. Yeah, that's why, of course, some situations and some facts we can't cover. And the main reason why, as for me personally, because it's not safety for the people who live in temporary occupied territories. It's a main reason why we can't cover some situations or some facts in our war.
Yes, but I think the question was whether journalists feel safe to report on occupied territories and, for example, go there if there's somehow an opportunity and get back to Ukraine and feel safe here or be questioned by the security service. That was something around your question, right?
In temporary occupied territories? Not, of course, because you haven't any guarantee in temporary occupied territories. Look, temporary occupied territories, it even not Russian rules. It's areas without any rules, and it's a black box. Because how will be the situation with you personally in temporary occupied territories? Any person knows. Yeah, I just hour ago presented this book about civil journalists. The situations, how this civil journalist went to jail, it's very different, and that's why we haven't any, mechanism or any roadmap what you should do in occupied territory as a journalist to cover the situation.
Yeah, Alim, but I think our colleague was asking about the controlled territories. Yeah,
control or temporary occupied territories?
Control, right?
Control.
Or just specify your question.
Because what I understood, again, maybe I missed some context here, is that even reporting on something like, there was explosion in Donetsk, and who caused them, could bring trouble to the journalist reporting it. So,
yeah, I'll give it.
I'll give it context too.
No. Your question is clear. I will give the microphone to Anton, but before that, just a short fact. I know only one Ukrainian journalist who went during full-scale invasion to the occupied territories, reported on it. Then got back to Ukraine. She was questioned by security services. Well, for obvious reasons, she got there, so there was a question, how did she get there? Then she went there again, and she got vanished. She went missing. We don't know where she is now. But Anton's case is different. Anton.
I really recommend to read this case on CPJ page to get more information and do not discuss it here. But if we are talking about general trend, the fight for freedom which Ukraine established like 10 years ago during Maidan revolution, and like the anniversary of the mass shootings will be like in a few days, it still is going. And Ukrainian citizens fighting for their freedoms and for their rights, not only with their external aggressor, which prevails right now and where Ukrainian nation dedicates most of the forces, but it's also internal fight to become a part of European family with European values, including the media speech and freedom of speech. And obviously, if you're reporting on sensitive issue which touches national security, you're getting some highlighted interest from security services. It's not like you are reported something and get banned and wherever in Ukraine. However, every journalist who works here for extensive period of time, especially with the topic of temporary occupied territories, they have elevated levels of attention from security forces of Ukraine. And that's the way how the state of Ukraine is trying to protect itself in the informational sphere. Is it the right way to do or not? That's the question for the future. However, there are a lot of gray and shadow zones in this process.
Thank you. I hope we somehow explained a little bit, answered your question. Maybe the last one. A question or
are there any other questions?
Comments?
No. Maybe you have some to
postcards. Anton wants to say something about the postcards. It's his photo from Donetsk.
Yeah. So actually, if someone wants to get a postcard, just get to me after the event. I printed some limited quantity of it, but I'm happy to share. Just you will take some small souvenir when you get back home.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you. We are having some small snacks and wine there, and we are finishing the event. Thank you. Guys, may I ask you to stand here for one group picture, please? All of you, yes, all of you present, please stand for a group picture. I really ask you to do it, but no one listens to me. Yes, especially our EU fellows, but all the other speakers and present journalists are also welcomed. Please here, just here, our photographer Valia will make a picture. So we remember this evening. Guys, please, and Valia will help us to stand beautifully so you can see us all in your